Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I am joined by Kevin Graham. Kev, 5-year anniversary. How does it feel?
It was when I mentioned it the other day that it was close to Lee Griffiths scoring the 2 goals against England. I was saying that must be close to round about the now. 5 years. We've squeezed an awful lot into that 5 years, Paul. And 2 of the years were a pandemic year as well. 2 pandemic years, 2 lockdown years,
Yeah.
Bizarre, really, really bizarre. And to see where we are now, to where we actually started is unbelievable. And it's quite weird. I remember the first conversation me and you had, and I think we're going to actually go across. One of the reasons that I got on board was basically because it just wasn't going to be a normal Celtic podcast. Mm-hmm. Because, as everybody knows, I'm more into the stories of football rather than the workings of football. And this is what it was. It was a storytelling podcast. We were going to get an interesting people in to tell us their Celtic story. And I'm quite glad that we've still got an element of that in the retrospective and also in the Scream of Celica as well. But it's going to be good to look back over some of our fantastic guests over the last 5 years.
Well, exactly. Now, we know how the system works, Kev. We know that we could put a sensationalised title onto a stream, stick it out and get people on to watch. But when we set up a Celtic State of Mind, that wasn't what our function was. It wasn't what our ambition was. We wanted to get under the floorboards of people that support Celtic, regardless of where you came from or what you did in life. And inevitably, we ended up speaking to a whole host of guests. We used to go out every single week. And what I've done today is I've spent this morning going through some of the earlier and not so earlier interviews that we did. And I'll tell you what, it was very enjoyable. It was very enjoyable to go through some of these old archive interviews, and it's something we should probably do more often, Kev, because there's a lot of people, like you say, who probably discovered the Celtic State of Mind when we started doing the live bulletins, when we started doing it like it is just now, who probably haven't gone back and listened to interviews that we've done with Ronnie Dyler, John Barnes, Neil Lennon, Lou McCarry. Oh man, there's so many interviews on the archive. We used to do them every single week, not all visual. Although we now do the visual interviews and have done so with the likes of Willie McStay, Paul Lambert, Alan Thompson, Mike Galloway and more, and we'll continue to do that. As you said, the actual content beyond the live streaming will continue. We're doing small video features, long documentary style features, Kev. We're working on all that kind of stuff, as well as a retrospective when we look at things like the old videotapes and your latest Scream of Celica with Kevin Miles, songwriter, will be this week. That will be happening this week as well. I've seen the edit, so there we go. What I'm going to do is we are going to bring up some of the choice cuts, as it were, and they are very interesting, as I say, and then we'll discuss the guests that we spoke to back in the day. And again, this kind of spans a 5-year period, which I find really bizarre, half a decade of a Celtic State of Mind. And my eyesight is dreadful. For anyone that knows me, you'll know that. So I will ensure, I hope, that I pick up the correct screen. So here we go. This will be the first one with Professor Willie Mailey. I don't know if you remember when we interviewed Professor Willie Mailey, who is an interesting character in any case. Some people may remember that he used to write for the Celtic View, but his old fella fought Franco in the Spanish Civil War, didn't he? And a whole host of different topics, including Paulo De Cano as well. So let's go back, I'm not even sure, 2019, 3 years almost, to hear what Professor Willie Mailey said about De Cano and fascism. Your love of Celtic and the political mind of a vast majority of the Celtic support is a player who was signed back in the time of Tommy Burns, who have just been discussing, Paulo De Cano. Now, Paulo De Cano is a self-proclaimed fascist, and he's tattooed his body and he's he's made the gestures on the field while he was playing for Lazio.
Yeah.
Because of that, Lazio, because of that, he's, for many Celtic fans, airbrushed himself out the history books.
Yeah.
The strange dichotomy of De Cano is he entertained, he played the way that Celtic fans loved, he played with a passion that Celtic fans loved. He had a fantastic relationship with Tommy Burns, which is retained through the Burns family to this day. Yet, Celtic fans don't want him in any way, shape or form to be connected to the club. What's your view on a situation like that?
Well, De Cano, I remember the goal against Aberdeen. I remember the goal in his debut, and when he ran into the goal to get the ball out and was rushing back. I remember the beautiful football that he played. My father loved De Cano. He loved Cadet. He loved Van Hooijdonk. And he loved players that played the beautiful game and played the Celtic way. And without a doubt, De Cano played the Celtic way. It was absolutely fantastic to watch. Now, a peculiar thing about my father was, my father loved Real Madrid because he liked Di Stefano and Puskas. He liked that particular team of the early 60s. He was drawn to them. Of course, that was Franco's team, Real Madrid. And in later years, people would say to me, "Oh, Barcelona, and you must be Barcelona if you have a team you're in." I said, "I quite like Real Madrid because I just remember that from my dad liking them." So it's difficult because with Celtic, my father couldn't separate his political interest from his Celtic state of mind. But when it came to players, what made players good was scoring against Rangers was extremely important. Even if you were a goalkeeper, you were still expected to score against Rangers, and playing beautiful football. My father really admired those. I mean, he always liked Berkovic because Berkovic scored 2 against Rangers even though we got beat. So those are the things that mattered. So my father loved the Three Amigos, and I remember those days because things didn't go great in other ways. But when De Cano left, remember people were saying, and I think Wim Jansen was going to come and build a team around him. That was really what you wanted to happen. You wanted De Cano to be the centre of things, and that would be how Celtic would play, and that would be what would save us. So that's my view. The politics are obviously, reprehensible, and the racism and fascism and so on. But I'm going to talk about De Cano as a player. What an amazing player, not just for Celtic, but a footballer, a really astonishing world-class footballer. And we had him, for a very short time. And I'm really glad I got to see him. I remember people singing D.I. Cano. I remember people that wanted to have De Cano's kids and so on. And it was a sensation. He was a star, and we've had a lot of fantastic teams at Celtic, a lot of fantastic players, and players with a real talent, but not necessarily charisma or personality or anything else. Now, when it comes to politics, I've defriended a few people over certain things, and I have my own political beliefs. I believe in a united Ireland. I believe in an independent Scotland. I'm anti-fascist, internationalist. I'm not a supporter of Brexit or Lexit or any of its guises because I'm pro-European, and as I say, I'm an internationalist. Individually, footballers, you don't go to footballers for the Communist Manifesto or for Mein Kampf or anything. I don't look to footballers to educate me politically. And so this might seem like a false separation to be able to make, but De Cano, the player, as I saw him, as I watched him, I remember getting into the Brazen Head and the Gorbals, and they had that most amazing photograph above the bar and above. I've not been in for a while, I don't know if that's there, of the Three Amigos, and that was just, so it was a season when we were lucky, and we had these amazing players playing. Everything else wasn't fitting together, but when you had that, what entertainment that was in a very brief period otherwise in our history.
Kev, when you watch that back, you think to yourself, a Celtic state of mind. We're covering fascism, Paulo De Cano, the Brazen Heads, D.I. Cano. Professor Willie Mailey knows a thing or two about fascism, obviously with his dad's history, and his old man was the subject of a song that was written by the Wakes as well. And I just found that interview fascinating with Professor Willie Mailey, because if anyone's going to have a view on De Cano, it's going to be him, isn't it?
Definitely. I think my takeaway for that, listening back to it again, is basically didn't look at
our sound quality's got better since then.
Definitely. I was definitely got better since then. No, as never looked to football players to be role models. I think that was his. I think that was his whole. I think that was what I took away from that. He should never look to footballers to set a political or moral compass whatsoever. And I mean, you're finding it more and more that you've got to separate art from artists now, don't you? Because of certain political views, and everybody has a right to have those views. I mean, there is a free speech thing there, but we can't argue that De Cano was a fantastic footballer, and we can't argue that he was a nice person as well, having spoke to the Burns family, and they haven't got a bad word to say about Paulo De Cano. But it's interesting to hear Willie Mailey actually says, and maybe we should all take head of that, that we didn't look to footballers to be your moral compass.
Certainly no political manifestos, that's for sure. I found it interesting that Willie Mailey used the term a Celtic state of mind as if it had entered common parlance, which I was pretty proud of, actually. But yeah, I look back on that and I think how far we've come, because, I mean, the quality of that video was all right, but when you start comparing it to the likes of the Alan Thompson one that we've done, or even the Paul Lambert one that we've done recently, we've definitely come a long way since then, Kev. The next video I want to bring up is very much a relevant one, because it was when I interviewed Neil Lennon. But before I do that, last word on De Cano, a great entertainer, a great individual player, Kev, but he didn't play in a successful Celtic team. And I think that what Ange Postecoglou is going for isn't that individual rogue talent. He's looking for the full collective, isn't he?
He has. I mean, we've spoke about Tommy Burns' side, possibly nearly on every episode in the last 5 years. We've mentioned Tommy Burns' side, and his side is more fondly remembered than some successful sides because of the way that we played football. Mm-hmm. And Postecoglou's trying to balance that, ain't he? He is trying to actually. He's trying to balance that. He wants to be entertaining and successful. And that's why I think I bought into him quite early on. I think Celtic need to play in a certain style. I really do. I think it's more enjoyable when we play in a certain style. Folk can argue about Martin O'Neill didn't have that certain style, but he just had a fantastic... he had Henrik Larsson. You had guys who had skill, verve, and who were born to play for Celtic. And I think Ange Postecoglou's trying to actually do the entertainment way as well. I think Celtic need to play a certain way. I was brought up with getting told Celtic played the way of the Lisbon Lions, and that's how I always want my team to play. I look at the centenary season. We played a certain way in the centenary season. We did, and that's the way for me. Celtic need to play, and that I didn't like it changing. I like to take all comers on head on.
Kev, you know this, right? Absolutely, cavalier. But Billy McNeil used to speak about that cavalier approach. I've got 8 clips. There's no way we're going to get through them because that's about 15 minutes in and we've only watched one. But I love the chat from our supporters. I mean, that's what you guys are in the chat. In comes Paul McLean. Watch this. How many pseudo-intellectuals does it take to change a light bulb, right? And then very closely, Gary Melrose, a few less than it takes to properly spell light bulb. I'm sorry, Paul, but I couldn't resist that. That was just very quick by Gary. And keep the chat coming because we've got a few other belters, I think Jerry Cinnamon would call them, coming your way. Neil Lennon, interview, Glasgow Royal Concert Hall, 1,500 sellout, Kev. I was the host. Talk us through that wee journey you and I took through to the concert hall, if you'll remember it.
I do remember it because you came to pick me up and he actually says, can you drive my car? Because I need to do my notes. Because you didn't have any questions for Neil Lennon. So I had to drive your car through while you actually done research and write your questions, sitting in the passenger seat of the car.
It went all right, though, eh?
You did all right. And was that also the night that Kevin Miles didn't turn up and I had to deport it?
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. That was Jim Craig one. Sorry, it wasn't. That was a different one.
But we did record it. We did record this interview with Neil Lennon. It's very interesting because he flew all the way back from Portugal. He was a Hibs manager at the time.
Aye.
I'm going to play it. I'm just going to play it because there's a few observations that I'm going to make after the event. This is Neil Lennon talking about Seville.
We played brilliantly against Lyon. We murdered Anderlecht at home. We drew with Bayern Munich. We were a goal up in Munich and ended up losing that one. And then
apologies, this is a technical issue because I've not saved it at the right bit, so I'm going to go back. But that's what happens with live telly. Here we go.
Unbelievable.
One of the greatest examples recently of that was obviously in Seville. The following year, in 2003, Neil, where we got to the first final in 33 years. When you went into that game, I think I remember reading that Martin O'Neill told everybody, go out there and come back with no regrets. Mm-hmm. What's your memories of the lead up to that particular match?
We stayed in Jerez. It was about half an hour outside of Seville. I remember training, I'd always go out and, on an evening game, I'd always go out and do something, me, Stan Petrov, a few others, just to break up the day rather than just stay in the hotel. I remember going down to the pitch at the hotel and it was roasting, this is like 11 o'clock in the morning. And I'm saying to Steve Walford, I'm not going to last the night, I'm going to fucking melt. It's like, he says, it'll be all right, Lenny, it'll be cooler later on. Just always remember thinking about the game, sitting in your bed, thinking about the game, thinking about Deco, thinking about, Costinha, Derley, what the atmosphere is going to be like. And just guzzling water all day as well, just to stay hydrated. And then going to the game and just, the feeling was intense. The best feeling was after the semi-final, what Chris has touched on, knowing you were going to the final with Celtic. That was the ultimate feeling. Going to the final itself was intense, And it's like Chris says, you don't remember the ones that you lose that often. The first half we didn't play as well as we could and we've gone in a goal down. And Martin got after us a little bit, not individually, just as a group saying, come on, you're better than that. You've got more in you. And second half, obviously Henrik was playing at the top of his game and it was fantastic second half. And once it went to 2-2, looked like we felt we were in control then. Really, really in control. And then obviously the Bobo sending off, changed the dynamic of the game. And they got the goal. And it was the silver goal rule at the time, where I think it was 15 minutes or something like that, you had to get a goal or the tie was over. It was just that gut-wrenching feeling at the end, that emptiness that you feel. Bitter disappointment and, just feeling you've let so many people down. But before the game you go out to warm up and again it's like 30 odd degrees out there and you're out warming up and you can just see a sea of green and white, and I still get goosebumps now thinking about it, but that is the big regret that didn't bring that trophy back because we had a fantastic team. And I heard you talking to Chris earlier about building on what we did at Seville. I actually thought the year after, in 2004, was probably our best year. Porto went on to win the Champions League that year. And we, domestically, I think we went 28 wins in a row. Wins like win. It was 25 or 28. Whitewash Rangers. And Chris scored a great chip. It was brilliant, but I'll just do an impression. You could see it from behind the goal and all the Rangers fans were doing the bouncy. The next thing the ball goes in the net like that. So, and then you're...
Superb, Kev. And the reason I let that play for a wee bit is because it showed you the relationship that night, the chemistry, the dynamic between Neil Lennon and the Celtic support. Because that place was mobbed that night. It was 1,500 strong. I've said this before, the reason I don't get nerves when I'm on a stage that big with so many people is because I'm blind and I can't see beyond 10 rows. But at the very end of the night when the lights came on, I couldn't believe the size of the place. But yeah, it's refreshing actually to remind ourselves, Kev, just that relationship that we had at that time. I'm saying we as a collective, as a Celtic fan base, because we know what happened last season. That was 4 years ago, that interview, Kev. What memories did that bring back, listening back to that?
It's interesting to hear it back, to hear him talking about Seville, and it's quite... obviously, he looks back on Seville. He's got a regret that they didn't win the game. I was recently at a night with Martin O'Neill, and Martin O'Neill was quite saying he didn't look back on Seville fondly because they had actually lost the game. Whereas Neil Lennon there sort of describes more as a fan, because like we enjoyed that journey to Seville, and even though we lost the final, it's still part of that whole journey getting there to that European final. Whereas Martin O'Neill at that night at Celtic Park, the Willie Mailey night at Celtic Park, was quite gone. I didn't think about it, we lost. And he was quite blanket over it, eh? Whereas us as supporters have a look at it very, very differently. And listen back there and hear Neil Lennon talk that, he's talking like a fan. He's talking like a supporter of the football club about getting that club to a European final and the whole occasion of that European final. Yes, he's got the professional regret, but he's got that fan like memory of it. He's not talking like, for me in that bit there, he's not talking like a professional footballer.
No, I get that. And remember the conversation we had with Neil and his agent Martin after the event, and we were talking about coming back to Celtic. And he was too professional to mention it on the stage, but at the time he was a Hibs manager. But they left us under, in no doubt rather, that Neil Lennon would be back as a manager someday at Celtic Football Club, Kev. And that's something that I often think back to. I
remember you saying that to me when you decided that you were driving home and I had to sit in the passenger seat. I wasn't allowed to drive home.
It's because you weren't insured.
Didn't have a driving licence. Never tell you that. But I remember you saying that to me, and I kind of dismissed it. Reason being, I thought the club had moved on, and I've said that over the last couple of years as well. I couldn't actually see it because I thought the club had moved on. But what I will say is Lenny will get a reception like that eventually again.
Joe Hamilton, the reason I bring it up, Lenny sacrificed himself for our club. In my books, he's a legend. He took the full brunt for things not within his power. I think he took a massive part of that last season, Kev. There's no doubt about it. I'm talking about last season as in Lenny's last season rather than last season as in the one we've just won the league. It doesn't feel like the new season yet. Maybe once we sign Jota and Cameron Carter-Vickers it will. But I guess that is my question. When is this going to happen though, Kev? Because, next year I'm expecting there to be a 20th get-together from all the Seville boys. I mean, you've just said there, I didn't realise, I wasn't there that night. That Martin O'Neill, I wasn't there for a number of reasons, but obviously a lot of people might have known that, a director of a State of Mind lost their daughter just leading into that week in horrific circumstances over in Canada. It was a road collision, and it was worldwide news because they fled the scene at the time. So we couldn't make it, but I'm pretty sure there will be get-togethers, Kev, who, where O'Neill will be there, and Neil Lennon's got to be part of that, and that's only next year.
I think as well, you've already seen the response from the Celtic fans when they won the Cypriot Cup as well. I do think that it's, especially the older generation of Celtic fans, we understand what Neil Lennon's given to the Celtic cause over the years. We do understand that he has got a Celtic state of mind. Look, whether the way that you'll actually look at it, he is a treble-winning manager. He is. He won his own treble and player. And if the 20th anniversary things go ahead next year, Neil Lennon will get a decent reception. I'm in no doubt about that whatsoever. Absolutely no doubt. The Celtic support are quite a forgiving bunch. I think there's only ever one guy that I know that will never be forgiven within the Celtic support. And we didn't need to mention his name.
He who shall not be named. You might be wondering why our good friend JP Mason is not on the show today. It's normally myself and JP. JP is otherwise engaged, but he asked me to remind everyone that his pal Michael Taggart is taking part in a very good cause, a charity Celtic FC Foundation and Mary's Meal cause, which is happening today in actual fact, where he is travelling, 3-day trek. What we've done, is we have put the link underneath the video. So if you wish to give anything at all to Michael Taggart, then please do so. There's a Just Giving link just underneath. It absolutely doesn't surprise me that Celtic fans all year round are raising cash for those in need, and obviously that's a good pal of JP, so if you're able to throw a couple of quid his way, please do so. We are going to bring up the St Mary's video at some point during this show, but here's one for you, right? You might not have watched this if you're a convert to Axom over the last couple of years. But one of my favourite interviews, and I'm going to double check that I've got it on the right bit, because I didn't the last time. Yes, one of my favourite interviews was when I spoke to John Barnes, Kev. You remember that?
Aye, what an interview that was, man.
And it was a really strange one because I can't remember the reason why, but we had planned to interview John Barnes for a long time, because I think I looked at all the managers that we've had since I was born, and those who were still with us, I would love to interview every single one of them. And you know, that was my whole kind of thought process behind it. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to interview John Barnes. So at some point, you and I got a number from our pals at the Anfield Wrap, I think it was. And it was in my phone. And then I seen something happening on Twitter, and he was basically falling out with all comers. And it was all about, racism. And I thought to myself, we need to speak to John Barnes about this. And it was about unconscious bias as well. So I decided there and then to drop Barnesy a wee text. That's tongue-in-cheek, by the way, for anyone who thinks that I'm pretending I'm his mate. I dropped him a wee text and says, do you fancy coming on and having a wee chat about this? Because it's obviously captured a lot of people's imaginations, and he agreed. And this is over Zoom, so I don't know in terms of the sound if there's going to be a drop in quality. This is me talking to John Barnes, former Celtic manager, about anti-Irish racism.
No, you're right. We do, John. What I'm trying to make the point of is, as a Celtic fan base, being predominantly Irish or of Irish heritage, we've suffered at the hands of racism in Scotland.
And working class people suffer. Exactly. Working classes suffer. Mm-hmm. And it's not racism, because the Irish are a different race to the Scottish, to the English, to the French. That's not racism.
Hibernophobia. I understand. I totally understand that.
No, that's not racism. So you have sectarianism, you have discrimination of all forms. But discrimination based on colour is different. So discrimination based on what we consider to be race is different. Because before 400 years ago, race as we know it didn't exist. You could have a black king. The race would be, if you're a Roman, you could be black, you could be white, you could be Chinese, and be a Roman citizen because you buy into the ideological and political identity of a particular region. You're the same race. And that's the way it should be. It shouldn't matter about colour. But then when all of a sudden, 400 years ago, when in the Enlightenment period, when it became man's individual rights, how can you enslave a man who looks like you? That is when serfdom was addressed. That is where slavery, because you had slavery in Scotland, in England, everywhere before you had transatlantic slavery. That was addressed because the right-minded people, from a religious point of view, or from a political point of view, said it's wrong to enslave people. So then something had to be done for you to enslave somebody else, which was nothing to do with racism. Slavery was nothing to do with racism. It was to do with economics. Getting somebody to work for you for free and not pay them. Now, you can do that with white people, because other well-meaning white people in the Enlightenment period, when a man's individual rights came to being, was saying you cannot do that to another person. So then, if you could get somebody who aren't people, because they look different, black, you can then say the Bible says, Hamitic prophecy, these people are different. You can have the greatest minds, geneticists, anthropologists, scientists, saying that genetically, these people are inferior to us. They're morally and intellectually inferior. From an intellectual point of view, and a scientific point of view, you can peddle that for 300 years so that eventually someone like Winston Churchill can believe in eugenics, and we all do, without even knowing it, or think that we believe in racial hierarchy, so unconsciously, to then, when all of a sudden something happens, we think automatically, you're inferior, you're superior, and we don't know why we feel that way. This is not what it was before, but this is what it is now. And you ask yourself, why do you feel that way? And we don't know, because this is how subliminal conditioning is worked for 400.
So that was John Barnes, Kev, and we're getting everything covered, really, all bases covered on the Axon Bulletin today. John Barnes, we interviewed, the first half was about exactly what I've just played, and the second half was about his managerial career at Celtic. Looking back on that, it was a very interesting interview, and he's a highly intelligent guy. Of course he is. It was a difficult interview. I've interviewed a lot of people over the years, Kev. Very difficult because his approach. But at the end of it, we were chatting away, and he agreed to come back on Axom a few years later, and he spoke to Natasha. So when we didn't get round to speaking about Stefan Bonn, unfortunately, when you think back to John Barnes' time in that particular interview, where he's talking about his lack of control as a manager at Celtic and the fact that signings were being made and he had nothing to do with them, etc. Did you think history's been revised a wee bit? He should have been stronger, or did you think it was a match that was never ever going to work with him and Dalglish at the helm? The dream team, the Celtic View called it, the dream team.
I mean, see, like that interview, as you say, the first half hour of that interview was a tough listen. And you done very well in that interview to actually keep your cool at certain times when you say that he's intelligent. He is an intelligent guy, but I mean, the bit about the anti-Irish racism there, that no being racist was, for me, completely against that. As HISC actually says, he's dancing on the head of a pin there. He's got that completely wrong. I mean, you just have to have a look at this country just now. I mean, I'm Scottish. I'm Scottish born and raised. My great-great-grandfather was from Donegal, but I get called a Fenian bee almost every week. So what is that? My daughter gets called a Fenian at school. So what is that? What is that, John? You need to explain that to me, John Barnes. But the second half of that interview was absolutely phenomenal. It lifted a lid on an awful lot of stuff that happened at the club at that time. Does he deserve to be revised? Probably no. He probably wasn't a strong enough character to handle that dressing room. That dressing room was lawless at that point, and it took Martin O'Neill to come in and sort out that dressing room. There was a lot of strong characters in that dressing room, and John Barnes just couldn't handle it. I don't think Dalglish helped him out at any point either, but I would recommend anybody go back and listen to the second part of that interview, because it lifted a lid on what happened round about that time.
You're talking there about not being strong enough to manage the dressing room. One of the things he tried to do was get rid of Craig Burley, because they clashed and Burley, kind of separated the players from the manager. But you just got to look at the Inverness Cardiff Thistle game at half-time, Kev, where a player refuses to go on for the second half. Barnes stands in the corner and lets Cedric Black deal with it. And you think, well, who's the gaffer here? You've got to take charge of that situation. That player should have been on the park for the second half with Rocket. Absolutely. But yeah, it was a very interesting one. What was his legacy? Was it Stan Petrov? I mean, on the one hand, he's talking about not having a great deal to do with the transfers. Petrov came through and came to Celtic whilst Barnes was the manager or head coach. So I don't even know if you can give him credit for that.
His legacy probably is, in my eyes, Dermot Desmond taking over the club, because Dermot Desmond then overruled everybody on the board and brought in Martin O'Neill. Mm-hmm. He didn't want Alan MacDonald at that time to actually make another appointment. So that's when so at that point, and I think Dermot Desmond admitted that a couple of months ago in that interview, that him and a couple of others basically had a coup at Celtic and basically took over the boardroom at that time. So that's John Barnes' legacy.
No, you're right. And when you think also about Fergus McCann's parting words to Alan MacDonald, it was, do not hire Kenny Dalglish. That was his parting words to Alan MacDonald. But Alan MacDonald was absolutely intoxicated with the idea of bringing King Kenny back to Celtic Park. And King Kenny said at the time, I'll come back, but I'm not going to be the manager. And they bowed to that, Kev. So they allowed an untested coach in John Barnes to take that role on Kenny's say-so. And I think that when it started going wrong, he wasn't there. That was at the time as well, Kev, where there was a bit of an uprising. Celtic players for the first time since 1965 started refusing to speak to the Celtic View. it was, there was a bit of an uprising. Dalglish wanted to try and re-engage with the fan base by doing a press conference down at the Baird's Bar, remember, with Vidar Riseth, and he got all the press guys in the boozer to do a press conference. But when I look back, it was pretty shambolic at Celtic at that time.
It was, even if you go back and listen to that interview, even the way that John Barnes was appointed, even the way Kenny Dalglish approached John Barnes to appoint him for that job was utterly amateurish. It was amateur hour. And looking back on it, it is cringeworthy seeing them doing press conferences in the Celtic Supporters Club on the London Road and also in Baird's Bar. It is very, very cringeworthy. And even though I think I loved it at the time, I did love it at the time, but when you look back on it, but I was young and stupid then. I'm just old and stupid.
Yeah, so. Well, your words, Kev, your words. We actually moved into the realms of creating videos, video features, and Mike Galloway was one of the first sit-down interviews that we did with the new team. I'm really fond of Mike. I know that obviously he's had his troubles, without a doubt. Most people are aware of his troubles as well, Kev. But I think when I spoke to him, he was in a good place. He was sober. He still is sober, I'm pleased to announce. Since we've met, he's been in for a heart operation as well. But Mikey is doing just fine and dandy. But there's a wee clip from that interview that I want to play, and it's talking about the late, great Tommy Burns. Here we go.
No, it wasn't. No, it was great. Tommy was amazing. I've got so much time for Tommy, to be honest, because when I had my car accident, Tommy and Billy Stark and somebody else were the first persons down at the hospital in Leicester beside my bed. And there was a story that Tommy touched. I'm still in a coma. Tommy touched my leg. He says, "Come on, Sykes, you'll be all right." And apparently I moved my leg. He was amazing. Amazing. I mean, I spoke to him in great deal about moving from Celtic to Leicester because I was having problems at home and different things. I was going through a divorce, and I felt a break would be good for me. Tommy was 100% by him. He says, "Right, we'll see what comes along." Within a couple of days, Leicester, Matt McGee got in touch, and I went down there on loan. But no, if I was great player, great person. Amazing religious man, lovely family. Exactly like Paul McStay, a different person.
Yeah. Now, what I love about that is you've got Mikey Galloway sitting there, and he doesn't do many interviews, Mike, but he was very open, Kev, and I think that it's easy to forget sometimes, not for him obviously, just how his Celtic career and his football career ended. So he's down at Leicester City on loan. They've just offered him a 4-year deal, Kev, which basically would have been his last deal as a footballer because he was 30, moving on to 31. And he's coming up the road to visit family, and he's involved in a head-on collision, which Beatty almost lost both his legs. He was in a coma for 6 weeks. And the story he told there, they used to call him Sykes after Psycho when he was at Celtic, so Tommy Burns called him Sykes. And Burns placed his hand on his leg and says, "Come on, Sykes." And apparently that was the first time there was any movement and any reaction was when Tommy Burns was there. And, when Mike told me that story, it was just like shivers down the spine kind of moment. That special man, Tommy Burns. But, when we went down and seen him, as I say, he was in great spirits, was Mike. And I don't know if I've shared this, but as we were leaving his house, he went inside. He was there with his missus. He went inside. He brought out his Scotland jersey that he wore for Scotland against Romania in the 1992 qualifier for the Euros. Long sleeved Scotland jersey with number 8 on the back, and he gave it to me. He says, "Take that up to the studio. I know you'll look after it." So, great experience. What's your memories of Mikey Galloway, and what's your memories and your thoughts having watched that wee snippet of that interview?
I've actually got fond memories of Mike Galloway in a Celtic jersey. There was a season and a half when he was a great player for us, even though the team were floundering at that point. But it was that time where you wanted honest professionals to become heroes, and Mikey seemed to actually fit that box, truthfully. He always gave his all. He was always there. He was never the most sulky player. But when you look at his career, it was a massive upward trajectory for him, and he just got there through sheer hard work, determination, and actually being honest. I was pleased when we signed him for Hearts. Mike Galloway, he turned up once to the Bannockburn Celtic Supporters Club dance once, and he was still there the following day, in the pub the following day. And if I remember correctly, if I remember correctly, well, you wouldn't get any. I mean, there's no way that you would get Jota, for example, turning up to a Celtic Supporters Club dance and still being there the following day.
But he turns up for a game of fives.
In Cyprus with a Celtic top on, aye, and I remember him. He was through the front, a pub called the Newmarket, and he was showing this lassie his Celtic tattoo. That he had his shirt off showing this lassie a Celtic tattoo. That's just the 90s, though. That's just that's a completely different time for football players. That used to be quite a common. That used to be quite a common occurrence, that the players used to still be there the day after, and that. Mikey was just an honest pro at a time where we were looking for honest pros. And
the thing is, that moment you spoke about, I say a moment, that period of time where he actually got capped for Scotland in the Euros, the qualifiers, that was under Liam Brady. He was playing central midfield, Kev, and he was outstanding. That was his best spell as a Celtic player. He was brilliant.
It was, and overall, he's never going to go down in the annals of Celtic history as a Celtic great or a Celtic legend. But for a period of time, you were glad to see Mike Galloway on the team sheet. And whether that says about the wider picture, you can make up your own mind. But I enjoyed Galloway when he had that purple spell for about 18 months. He was fantastic for us. And it was a bad time, and the team was in an awful mess. But Mikey lived the dream. He lived what we all want today, still want today at our ages. And he done it. And he done it well for a period. So fair play to him.
Fair play to him, and we wish him all the best. But you've brought me a memory. Just this week, in actual fact, we interviewed Richard Jobson, a famous name around Dunfermline and further afield, lead singer of the Skids, of course. A guy who, he's a poet, he's a spoken word performer, he's an artist, Kev, he's a director, he's a writer, he's a frontman, he's a St. Pauli fan, he's a Celtic fan, and he's just an all-round, very interesting and decent human being. But when I met up with him in Dunfermline to go down to do the interview, he was with his brother John. I don't know if you remember the interview we did with John Jobson that was on this channel. We'll need to revisit that as well because it was hilarious. And John's sitting there. He was John Peel's favourite footballer. He played centre forward for Meadowbank Thistle, Kev, and used to score 40 plus goals a season on a regular. And, I was just saying, I was getting my hair cut because their other brother has the barbers in Dunfermline. I says, I'll get my hair cut. There's a great picture of you up on the wall with George Best, because Meadowbank Thistle played Hibs, and it was at Tynecastle, and Hibs beat them 1-0, and I was like, how was he that night? He says, he was rotten. He was absolutely rotten. He set the goal up, but he never done much else. And you're just going back to a different era of footballers. I mean, I'm sitting there in a cafe in Dunfermline talking to John Jobson about George Best, and it was just like water off a duck's back. It was brilliant. Absolutely no ego, which I loved. Now, I'm going to apologise in advance. Maybe I shouldn't, because it is worthwhile. One of my favourite interviews of all time I've ever done on a Celtic State of Mind was with Professor Phil Scraton, who, if you want to read anything on Hillsborough, then read his book, The Truth. Unbelievable book, incredible book. He set up the Hillsborough Independent Research Project, which led to the reopening and the public inquiry into Hillsborough and everything that's happened since then. The guy, he wouldn't be knighted. He's probably been offered it. He wouldn't take it. But the interview was unbelievable, Kev. And the snippet that I've got of Professor Phil Scraton is quite a long one, but I think it's important. I feel that it's important to play it in its entirety. So I'm going to play that in a wee second, and I'm going to ask a few questions in relation to our relationship with Liverpool following this clip as well. So let me just bring it up first of all, make sure it's nice and loud. And as I say, it's a kind of longer clip, but it is necessary, so I'm going to play that now.
It's called.
Some of the things you mentioned there, it's corruption to the worst degree, Phil. I mean, the headlines that were run by the Sun newspaper, I think it was
that the Liverpool fans picked the pockets of the dead. I mean, that kind of line has never left the consciousness of not only Liverpool, people of Liverpool, but anyone with a working class background, anyone who opposes this type of corruption for the betterment of the authoritative figure. Now, when I'm looking at how this is escalating in the background, would I be right to say that the lie started with David Duckenfield? That's where the lie began, when he stated that the Liverpool fans had forced open that exit gate.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, that, because he's caught in the headlights. You know, here's a man who's never, ever had responsibility for policing a major football match in a major stadium. And he's on duty. And he's only been at Hillsborough to observe 2 previous football matches, both ordinary matches, with one of them a midweek game with very small attendances. He took over because there was an allegation of corruption in the force, and Bernard Moe, who had been his predecessor, had been moved sideways. And Moe said he would come back just to police the semi-final. And the Chief Constable, Peter Wright, who incidentally was from Liverpool, he turned him down. So Duckenfield was in charge. On the day, he turns up, he briefs his men and women at about 11 to 12 in the morning, and then he disappears. He disappears. And to this day, and all of the documents I have on Hillsborough, I've never been able to trace it. The court case against him, the inquest, none of it were able to reveal precisely where he was for the 2 hours between 12 noon and 2 o'clock. So he disappears. He leaves the Bernard Murray, his assistant, who's very experienced, he leaves him in charge of the control box and goes. When he comes back, it's 2 o'clock, and it all happens. And it all happens so fast. He's asked to open the gates. He doesn't even understand the fact that there are central gates. He hasn't got that in his consciousness. He doesn't know the ground. And because he's asked by the senior officer outside the ground desperately to open the exit gates, he opens the exit gates without securing the tunnel. So the tunnel is a 1 in 6 illegal gradient down into the backs of the 2 pens, which are already full. When people come through the gates, all they see is the word standing above the tunnel until they go straight down it into the backs of those pens. He's up in the control box, and it's absolutely self-evident. I've stood in that control box myself. It's self-evident from the distance I could kick a ball. It's self-evident that those 2 pens are completely packed tight, whereas the side pens, people are sitting in the sun reading the newspaper. They're sitting down in a sunny day on the steps reading a newspaper. And yet the central pens are already full. And down that tunnel, that 1 in 6 gradient tunnel, 2,000 fans walk into the back of the 2 pens already full. When they turn, they can't go sideways, they can't go forwards. So when they turn to try and go back, there are more coming down the tunnel. He is completely, by this point, out of his depth. And what he does is he lies. He lies. There's no question. It's there in black and white. He says to the head of the FA and his assistant, he says to them, the Liverpool fans have forced the gate and they've come down the tunnel into the back of fans. They've rushed the tunnel. Graham Kelly, who is the recipient of this news and who heads the FA, he then feeds this information immediately. Within 2 hours, Jacques Georges, who's president of FIFA, is talking about Liverpool fans as animals charging into the stadium. So it's now gone round the world. Later that evening, when the truth becomes clear to the chief constable instructs the media that Duckenfield made a mistake. But the lie then is told. The lie consolidates. The atmosphere that is created of that lie, that somehow Liverpool fans forced it.
Kev, what a powerful interview that was with Professor Phil Scraton. I would urge anybody to go and read his book, The Truth. Unbelievable. Hillsborough, The Truth. Thinking back, an hour and a half, that man is unbelievable, isn't he? He's a saint.
He is. I mean, the amount of hours and time that he's put in over decades to try and get the truth for those families in the '97 that were lost at Hillsborough. The amount of hours that everybody concerned with that campaign is put in. But I remember listening to that podcast. I mean, you done it over Zoom. That was just at the start of lockdown. That would have been it. That would have been round about the start of lockdown.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to that, and it's just like it's phenomenal. How much corruption actually went on at that side at that time, and probably is still happening today. What he's actually talking about there, corruption and lies at government, police, and at high levels of society is still going on, and it's still there. Nothing's changed in the 30 odd year since the Justice for the Hillsborough campaign actually started. Then football fans are still treated like second-class citizens. It doesn't matter where you go. Every Celtic fan will have stories of things that have been reported in the papers, and you go, well, I was there, that never happened. But what's reported becomes the truth because somebody wants their truth out there, and they don't want it questioned. And you've seen it in the last couple of weeks at the European Cup final as well. UEFA were quick to blame the Liverpool fans again, and that's been absolutely taken apart by a number of like independent journalists that were actually there that day. I went, no, that's not what actually happened. And every football fan, not just Liverpool fans, not just Celtic fans, every football fan will have a story. The main one for me, no remember the Dundee riot. No remember it was front page of the Sun, the Dundee riot. Well, I was in Dens Park that night. There was no riot. There was absolutely no riot whatsoever. But that still gets to talk about like as if it actually happened. Well, no, it didn't actually happen. There wasn't a riot. But that's every football fan's got a story like that where the authorities have blamed the fans and it's been their poor organisation, poor stewarding, etc. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And again, anybody who's watching, go back and listen to Professor Phil Scraton, who, by the way, is a Liverpool and Celtic fan, and he spoke about his introduction to Celtic being the 1966 European Cup Winners' Cup semi-final down at Anfield as well. So give that a listen. You will not regret it. I want to leave everybody with one final wee video clip before Kevin and I wrap up. And this is more to do with what everybody has done with ACSOM and as part of ACSOM in relation to the charity endeavours, Kev, every single year that we now commit an entire weekend and obviously the weeks leading up to that to ensuring that some charities benefit from the fact that Celtic fans can come together. And in the last 2 years, 55 grand has been raised for a number of charities. Last year, just under £29,000 was raised for St Mary's in the Catlin, which, as you know, is the birthplace of Celtic Football Club. I think that it's important to play this wee clip because even since this video was made, I've heard a lot of people going on about how Celtic support St Mary's. I'm going to play this because that isn't the case. I'm going to play this video because this is us in St Mary's, and this is a massive thank you to everybody who donated to our charity weekender last year.
You might recall it was not long after wee Bertie's funeral took place here that we first met, and it was in anticipation of your fundraising campaign. And when I understood that St Mary's would be a beneficiary of that, I was delighted on several fronts. I think one of the motivating factors for yourself engaging with me was that you had come to realise that St Mary's gets no external help or assistance and is very much dependent on the generosity of the folk in Calton and those who attend. And almost 2 years into the pandemic, the parish was in, let's just say, courting a disastrous situation. The money raised has been truly transformative. It certainly is giving us a safety net. That's mitigate against the costs everyone is experiencing rising just now. But it certainly helped us fund the fabric of this place. It's taken us from, to be honest, debt back into the black, which is fantastic. But it also gives us scope to continue to try and do good work in the area for folk. The poverty that existed in this area when Brother Walfrid and Celtic were founded does exist. It's got a slightly different face. It finds its face in drug abuse, prostitution, neglect, isolation, and there are good parishioners here who associate with the parish and endeavour to do good work. We even host it's asylum seekers who were unaccompanied, whose parents have died and found themselves in this country, and that's work that goes on in the background discreetly, and I'm delighted at that. I would probably also share with you personally what the outreach from Celtic State of Mind made for me. I probably was in a fairly dark place. The only real time I'd been getting out during the pandemic was to celebrate yet another funeral. I think over 160 COVID funerals and 200 more funerals, including the loss of my own father. And the outreach from Celtic State of Mind that came from nowhere really lifted my spirits, because in big masses like, say, Bertie's funeral, 125 Mass, and all those things, and this church is a great theatre almost for these great events. But when the show moves out of town, you can be very much on your own, and to think that the supporters of Celtic State of Mind took a pause, stopped to think, and made that outreach means a tremendous amount to me personally, just on a very human level.
Kev, I think that says it all. That's the difference that can be made when a group of people, and in this instance a group of Celtic supporters, get together, pull together, and get organised and make a difference. I mean, that's astonishing listening back to that interview, isn't it?
It is, and it's the priest, Father White, like he still seemed a bit unsure and a bit lonely there. Still seemed a bit unsure of himself. But one of the takeaways, the big takeaway that I take away for that is, like, what he says is that the problems that Celtic Football Club were set up for, that Brother Walfrid set up the club for, are still alive and well today, but they just take different guises. And that's something that we should never forget, and it's something that the club should never forget. And it's, I mean, I know the Celtic Foundation are doing stuff like that today, but I found that a really, really powerful interview, and what a beneficiary for everybody that watched Axel efforts. But it was truly brilliant. It truly, truly did make a difference to that man.
It definitely did. You could feel it. You could feel that looking at the interview back. Anyone who hasn't visited St Mary's, take yourself down there. I mean, you know the Axom cross that you see as our logo. We have modelled that on the mosaic as you walk into the chapel, Kev. It's on the floor. And obviously, you know, you go in there and there's so much history. Obviously, that's where in the hall, which is no longer standing, where Celtic were founded. You know, pay it a visit. Speak to Canon Tom White, and you know, it's really, for me, it's one of the things that going in there, you can actually feel it. You can feel the tradition, you can feel the history. Also, the Brother Wilfred paintings in there as well. You can go and have that. You know, the Peterhausen painting. Go and have a look at that as well. But one reminder would be that plans are already underway, Kev, for our charity weekend at the end of this particular year. It's going to be a wee bit different. So although we will be going out live for 24 hours over a particular weekend, it will be pushing those watching to something a wee bit different that they might get involved in. I can't reveal too much at the moment. We're at the planning stage, but I'm pretty sure that you'll all be up for it. It's ambitious, Kev. I'm
Very
pretty
ambitious.
Sure it's ambitious, but you know, you've got to be ambitious, and we're going to give it a try. And we're going to use the Axon platform, hopefully, to get Celtic and St Mary's in the public eye, let's just say. So, and raise loads of money as well for charity. So it's been very interesting today looking back on the likes of Neil Lennon, Professor Willie Mailey talking about fascism, Mike Galloway, St Mary's, John Barnes, and Professor Phil Scraton talking about Hillsborough, Kev. And I'm pretty sure over the next 12 months and beyond, there will be loads more interesting characters on this show.
Want to know something, Paul? See what we've just actually says in the last hour. It's what you sold me a Celtic State of Mind was going to be, and is the reason that I'm involved. And it's weighty subjects, it's storytelling. And the 4 things that you've picked are the reason why I got involved. I wouldn't have got involved if it was just who's going to play right back, who's going to play left back. Stuff like the 4 things that we've reviewed today is the reason that I'm involved with a Celtic State of Mind, and will continue to be involved in a Celtic State of Mind.
Brilliant. I love to hear that, Kev. And by the way, just as a reminder, when I first met Kev, he was wearing a Michael Head t-shirt. Michael Head, after 40 years of recording, is on the cusp of being in the top 10 for the first time in his musical career, Kev. So anybody who likes a bit of that type of music, go out and buy Dear Scott, download it, stream it, do all that kind of stuff. It would be phenomenal to see Mick Head, and he's actually sitting at number 4 in the charts at the moment, Kev. And obviously we went down and met him last month, which was one of the best experiences of my time being involved with the channel as well. I've got to thank every single person who has got involved over the last 5 years. Everybody who has got involved in the chat today. Thank you all for having a Celtic State of Mind and getting involved. And thank you to Kevin Graham for joining me on a Celtic State of Mind.